Good evening, wanderers of time. Before we begin tonight's journey, tell me, where in the world are you listening from? The story you are about to hear drifts from the heart of the Ottoman Empire, from the quiet roads where children once walked beneath the moon, and from the echoing courtyards where silence became devotion. Close your eyes. Let the sound of the sea carry you through the centuries. Let the lanterns of Istanbul flicker in your mind. Tonight, we remember the stolen sons of an empire and the mercy that outlived them all. You are listening to Children of the Empire, a Janissary's lullaby. Wherever you are, let the past unfold gently, and may this story keep you company until sleep finds you. The night they came was softer than a whisper, yet it changed the world. Even now, decades later, when the wind moves through cypress trees, I can hear that night breathing again. It begins with the hush before the fire dies, the kind of quiet that makes even the stars hold their breath. I was perhaps 10, perhaps younger, old enough to know my mother's voice from the rustle of the curtains, but too young to imagine that a world could take her away in one movement. We lived in a small village folded between hills that smelled of thyme and goat milk, where the river carried stories from mountain to sea and the mountains themselves never moved, only watched. It was the kind of place where you could tell the season by the sound of the sheep's bells, and every neighbor's window was a lantern to another family's life. That night, the moon was a sliver, pale and curved, like a nail clipping from God's hand. I had fallen asleep beside my mother on the floor, our blanket rough but warm. She had braided her hair before sleeping, and I remember the smell of lavender she always kept hidden in her apron pocket. The fire was dim. Only the red coals pulsed, slow as an old heart. Somewhere far off, a wolf sang its thin, sad song, then silence. Not the gentle silence of night, but a silence that trembles. Dogs began to bark, but were quickly quieted. A door banged open, then another. My mother stirred. Her hand went to my shoulder, not to shake me, but to feel that I was still there. "Stay still," she whispered, her voice a reed trembling in the wind. The sound of hooves, slow, deliberate, approached the edge of the village. We could hear the men shouting to one another, but not in our tongue. The words were low, rhythmic, and unfamiliar Ottoman Turkish, though I did not know that name then. I only knew that their voices had weight, and that the night itself seemed to bend under them. A knock came, not angry, but absolute. 3 strikes, boom, boom, boom. The sound filled the house like smoke. My mother stood. Her face was white, almost glowing. She wrapped her shawl around me, wool, old, smelling of smoke and milk, and held me close to her knees. Her heartbeat was faster than mine. When she opened the door, the cold entered first, then the lantern light, and behind it, the men, riders, soldiers, their cloaks wet with mist, their boots heavy with travel. Their eyes were calm, unreadable. They did not look like thieves or monsters. They looked like men who had done this many times before. "Devshirme," one said. A single word, but it was enough. My mother froze. She knew that word. Everyone in our village did. The gathering of boys, the taking. Some families hid their sons in the woods. Some sent them away months before. Others prayed it would pass them by. It never did. My mother's lips trembled, but she did not plead. Perhaps she knew pleading would make it worse, or perhaps she was already halfway to despair. Her eyes searched the faces of the soldiers, as if one might remember having been a son once. One of the men spoke again, more gently. "Your boy will serve the Sultan," he said. "He will be fed, clothed, taught. He will become strong, a soldier of God." But I did not want God that night. I wanted my mother's shawl and the sound of rain on the roof. She stepped aside slowly, her hands shaking, her lips moving in silent prayer. I remember her whispering, "If it must be, let him live long." The man who seemed their leader stepped inside. He was tall, with eyes that had seen too much. He knelt before me so that his face was near mine. "Your name?" he asked softly. I told him. My voice cracked like a twig. He nodded, then said, "Remember it, boy. Keep it deep inside you, but soon you will have another." He stood, took a small piece of paper from his belt, and wrote something with a quill that glinted in the light. The feather trembled as it wrote my future. When he extended his hand, I looked to my mother. Her eyes said go, even though her heart said stay. She pressed something into my palm, a single bead from her rosary. It was warm, as if it had stolen a piece of her pulse. "Keep it," she said, "and one day give it back to me." Outside, the village was awake now. Faces at doors, mothers clutching sons, fathers standing helpless, pretending to be stone. The soldiers moved quickly, gathering boys, counting, writing names. Some mothers tried to bribe them with bread or coins. Some fell to their knees. Others stood silent, their dignity the last thing that could not be taken. Peter, my closest friend, was among them. He had a cut on his cheek from climbing trees too fast. He looked at me and gave a small, defiant grin, the kind he wore when he dared me to jump from the tallest branch into the river. It was not courage. It was the stubbornness of childhood that refuses to understand loss. The men tied small cords around our wrists, not cruelly, just to count us. They led us toward the edge of the village where horses waited, steaming in the night. The stars above were indifferent. The moon hid behind a cloud. I looked back once. My mother was still in the doorway, her shawl over her head, her hand covering her mouth. She did not wave. Waving would have made it real. As we walked away, I felt the bead in my hand grow cold, as if the warmth it once held was now trapped inside her. The road was long and black. The sound of boots, of hooves, of chains softly touching each other, like metal sighing. We were not beaten. We were not comforted. We were simply taken. Days blurred into one another. We walked from dawn to dusk, resting only when the sun sank and the frost rose. We crossed valleys and rivers, forests that whispered in tongues older than men. The sky was our roof, the ground our bed. Some of the smaller boys cried. Others walked in stunned quiet. I learned that hunger makes the world sharper. The smell of bread from a distant farmhouse could make your knees tremble. Once, an old man left a loaf by the roadside. The soldiers took it, tore it into pieces, and gave each of us a bit. Even in captivity, there were moments of mercy. At night, the fires burned low. We huddled close, sharing warmth, not words. Sometimes one of the older soldiers would sing softly in Turkish, and though we didn't understand, it felt less frightening than silence. The melody was slow, like waves lapping against wood. It lulled us, not to peace but to endurance. The stars were our only witnesses. I learned to name them by their brightness, to find comfort in their patience. Somewhere among them, I imagined my mother watching, sewing the night back together with prayers. The road was not a road, but a wound, long, pale, unending. It cut through the hills and vanished into a horizon that always stayed too far away. We were maybe 50 boys, all from different villages, tied together by the same thin rope and the same disbelief. Behind us, smoke from our homes still curled upward in the dawn, like the last thoughts of sleeping mothers. The soldiers who guarded us rode in silence. They spoke to one another only when the terrain demanded it, when a bridge was broken, when a stream ran high, when one of us stumbled too long. Their silence was not cruel, it was weary. They had done this before. We were not their first caravan of sons. Each morning began with the cold that bit at our fingers. Our breath came out in clouds that looked like prayers. Sometimes we walked through fog so thick that even our shadows vanished. It was as if the world itself was trying to forget us. I remember the first day clearly. The sun rose behind us, red and slow, lighting the frost on the grass until it looked like the earth had grown a coat of glass. I walked behind Petar, who still had that stubborn tilt of the head. Though his eyes had grown older overnight, he whispered without turning, "Do you think they'll feed us?" "I don't know," I said. He nodded as if my uncertainty was proof of something. Later that day, one boy tried to run. He darted into the trees when we stopped by a stream. He didn't get far. He slipped on wet leaves, and a soldier caught him by the arm. The soldier didn't strike him. He just knelt beside the boy and said something in Turkish, softly, almost kindly. Then he lifted the boy up, brushed the dirt from his knees, and tied the rope around his wrist again. From then on, no one tried to run. At night, the men built fires in small circles. They ate from copper pots that smelled of lentils and salt. When they finished, they passed us bowls with what was left. It was not much, but it was enough to remind us that hunger had boundaries. We slept in clusters, using our arms for pillows, our breath for warmth. Sometimes I dreamed of my mother's house, the sound of her grinding grain, the way the window shook when the wind pressed its hand against it. In the dream, she was always singing a lullaby I could never finish hearing. Each time I woke, the song was gone, replaced by the murmur of the river or the shifting of boots. There was a boy from the mountains, Nicola, tall for his age, quiet. He carried a small wooden carving in his hand, a saint's figure his father had made. When one of the guards saw it, he reached out to take it. Nicola didn't resist, just stared with eyes like stone. The guard turned the carving over in his hand, studied it, then returned it without a word. That night, Nicola whispered to me. He wasn't bad. He was just tired. It was the first time I realized how exhaustion can soften cruelty. Days passed like this, stacked on top of one another, until I could no longer tell where one ended and the next began. We crossed rivers so wide they looked like mirrors for the sky. We passed through villages where women stared from doorways, clutching their own sons closer. Sometimes they made the sign of the cross. Sometimes they just looked away. In one town, the air smelled of cinnamon and smoke. We stopped in a courtyard surrounded by white walls. An old man brought buckets of water for the horses, then quietly left a loaf of bread near the boys. A soldier noticed, picked up the loaf, tore it into even pieces, and shared it among us. No one thanked him. But the way he divided it, careful, equal, was a kind of prayer. On the fifth night, we reached the plain. The moon hung low, a perfect silver bowl pouring light over the earth. The soldiers dismounted and let us rest. Someone began to hum, a tune from home, maybe from Macedonia or Thrace. Soon others joined, each boy adding a different note, a different grief. It became a song without words, rising into the night like smoke from unseen fires. The soldiers did not stop us. One even closed his eyes, as if remembering a voice from long ago. The next morning, frost had turned our ropes stiff. When they cut them loose so we could walk freely, I rubbed my wrists and saw faint bruises shaped like moons. I traced them with my thumb, thinking how easily skin remembers even the softest chains. We walked for weeks. The weather changed. Spring began to chase away winter's breath. The snow melted into rivers that hummed beneath the bridges, and sometimes the soldiers let us wash there, our hands pale in the current. The cold water stung, but it felt like a promise that we were still alive. I started to learn the rhythm of their speech, not the meaning, but the music. Turkish flowed differently. It curved like a stream, not like the harsh consonants of our village tongue. I began to recognize words: ekmek for bread, su for water, yol for road. Each word was a small bridge between who I was and who I was becoming. Peter began to collect pebbles from the places we camped. "Someday," he said, "I'll drop them on the road home. So I'll know the way I didn't tell him that by the time he returned, the road might have changed, or that the home he remembered might not be waiting. Some truths are kinder unspoken." We passed through forests so dense that daylight was a rumor. The trees whispered in languages older than prayer. Birds flew above us, free and indifferent. I wondered if they carried our names in their wings, scattering them like seeds across the empire. One evening, it rained for hours, the kind of rain that erases footprints, that teaches even the strongest voice to whisper. We huddled under a cart, the drops tapping the wood like fingertips. The guard nearest us pulled his cloak over my shoulders. He said something, maybe sleep, maybe quiet. His face was young, his beard thin. He could have been my brother. That night, I dreamed of a field of olive trees, endless and silver, each leaf a memory turning in the wind. My mother stood at the far end, holding out her hand. When I tried to run to her, the field stretched further and further away, but the wind carried her voice to me. "Walk like the son of a king." When I woke, the sky was pink with dawn. The road curved down toward the sea. The air smelled different, salt, gulls, a kind of light that shimmered even on the stones. One of the men said, "Istanbul," pointing ahead. The others turned to look, and for the first time, I saw the domes rising in the distance, pale, enormous, floating above the mist like dreams that had learned to become real. 1,000 stories of marble and gold. The minarets speared the morning sky. Even from far away, the city looked like a place that could swallow boys and return them as men. My heart beat faster, not from fear, but from something stranger, something like awe. Petar whispered, "Do you think they'll let us see the Sultan?" I said nothing. I only watched as the sun spilled over the Bosphorus, turning the water to fire, and thought, this is where my life will begin again. When the city first appeared, it rose like a mirage between sea and sky, a dream built on stone, shimmering through the early mist. We had walked for weeks, maybe months, yet none of us had imagined this. A place so vast it seemed to breathe with its own rhythm, a city whose domes caught the morning light, as though God himself had laid his palms upon them. The soldiers slowed their horses. We, the boys, followed on foot, small, silent shadows in a procession that smelled of salt, leather, and exhaustion. The air was thick with the cry of gulls, the sharp scent of the Bosphorus, the echo of voices calling in languages I did not yet know. Somewhere, a muezzin sang the dawn prayer, and the sound drifted through the fog like smoke, soft, rising, folding itself around the rooftops. It was not a song I understood, but it reached into me the way water finds the cracks in stone. We crossed a bridge of marble. Below, the sea churned with the morning tide, its surface scattered with boats. Narrow fishing vessels, merchant galleys heavy with spice, and further out, the great ships of the Sultan, their sails swollen with the breath of empire. The bridge trembled beneath the weight of hooves, wheels, and destiny. As we entered the first gate, a towering arch carved with Arabic script, I felt a cool shadow pass over me, the kind of shadow that belongs to history. Beyond the gate lay the world's beating heart. Narrow streets crowded with vendors, the smell of roasting nuts, honeyed pastries, and coffee thick as tar. Silk fluttered in the air like butterflies. Men shouted prices, bargaining with laughter or fury. Women veiled in gauze glided through the market like moonlight through water. And above it all, the city sang. Not with voices alone, but with hammers, bells, the clink of coins, the rustle of thousands of footsteps. I had never seen so many faces. Each one seemed to hold a different story. Arabs with deep eyes and desert voices, Greeks with olive skin and sadness around their mouths, Persians with rings on their fingers and words like music, Armenians, Jews, Africans, Slavs. It was as if the earth itself had gathered its children here to trade not only goods, but memories. We passed through another gate, smaller but more ornate, guarded by men in gleaming helmets, their beards black and oiled, their hands resting easily on the hilts of their swords. They looked at us briefly, not with cruelty, but with a kind of detached curiosity, as one might look at young trees that will, someday, become pillars in a palace. A boy ahead of me whispered, "Are we to be slaves?" Another answered, "No, soldiers." Both were right, though neither knew what that truly meant. By midday, the heat shimmered above the cobblestones. Our feet ached, our throats burned. The soldiers guiding us stopped in front of a high gate of iron lattices. Through it, we could see a courtyard lined with cypress trees, and beyond, a building of white marble with windows framed in gold. "This," one of them said, "is where you will stay." The gate opened, slow and heavy. Inside, the air changed, cooler, quieter, as though even the wind obeyed rules here. We stepped into a world built on silence and symmetry. A fountain stood in the center, spilling water into a pool so clear that the sky seemed to rest within it. Turtles drifted lazily among the lily leaves. The scent of jasmine floated from the gardens. Somewhere, a peacock cried, its voice strange and beautiful, like laughter mixed with grief. Men in white robes appeared, not soldiers, but attendants. They looked at us with mild eyes, then motioned for us to follow. They led us into a long hall lined with tiles, blue and green and gold, each tile painted with flowers, calligraphy, and the curve of heaven itself. Light from the high windows poured down in rivers of dust and gold. We were told to sit. Water was brought in silver cups. Bread, figs, and dates were placed before us. The attendants did not speak, but their gestures were kind. It was the first time since we had been taken that I tasted sweetness without guilt. The figs were soft, the dates like warm honey. Even the bread smelled of comfort. After we ate, they took us to a bathhouse. Steam rose from marble basins, and the air was filled with the sharp scent of soap made from olives. They washed us one by one. I remember the touch of warm water on my skin, the dirt of the journey spiraling away into the drains, the strange relief of losing what had clung to me from my old life. When I looked into the water, I saw my reflection for the first time since leaving home. The boy who stared back was thinner, older, but in his eyes there was still a spark of the village, a bit of mountain air and mother's song. I whispered my name to the water, as if to teach it not to forget. Then came the haircut. They sat us in a row and cut our hair short, even and clean. The sound of scissors filled the hall, snip, 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 like the soft chopping of branches in a forest that no longer belonged to itself. When it was done, they rubbed scented oil into our scalps and handed us new garments. White linen shirts, sashes of deep red, simple trousers, sandals made of soft leather. We were dressed alike now. 50 boys from 50 villages, all remade into a single shape. Peter ran his hand over his cropped hair and laughed quietly. "You look like a prince," he told me. "So do you," I said. And though we both knew it was not true, the lie felt like a rope we could both hold. That evening, we were led into a courtyard where the sun was sinking behind the domes. The call to prayer rose again, and for the first time, we were told to stand and watch. The older men faced the setting sun, their hands lifted, their lips moving in rhythm. The light turned everything gold, the tiles, the leaves, the very air. I did not understand the words, but I felt something in them. A quiet, powerful surrender, a peace that came not from freedom, but from acceptance. When night fell, the attendants brought blankets and mats. We lay in rows beneath a ceiling painted with stars. The air smelled of rosewater and wax. Some boys whispered prayers to gods who would never find them here. Others simply stared at the ceiling until sleep claimed them. I could not sleep. I turned the bead my mother had given me in my hand until it warmed. I thought of her face, of the way her voice cracked when she whispered my name. Then I thought of the fountain in the courtyard, its calm, endless flow. And I wondered if the same God who watched over her village also listened to the water here, and if somewhere between us, those two prayers met and recognized each other. When they brought us into the palace school, the first thing I noticed was the silence. Not the silence of fear, nor the kind that follows pain. This was the silence of discipline, a stillness so complete that even the wind seemed to bow before it. The school was a world within the world, a garden of marble and water and rules. Here, boys like us, taken, renamed, reshaped, were taught not just how to fight, but how to become. Our teachers called it Enderun, the inner palace where boys of promise were polished like stones until they gleamed. But in the beginning, I felt less like a stone being polished, and more like one being ground to dust. We rose before dawn each morning, when the sky was the color of unbaked clay. A bell would ring once, soft, hollow, and every boy would wake, fold his blanket neatly, wash his face, and line up in silence. No one spoke. Words were for later when we had earned them. The courtyard was cold. We faced east toward the faint light of the coming sun. An older boy, already trained, recited the prayer in Arabic, slow, melodic, ancient. The words flowed like water across stone, and though I didn't yet know what they meant, I felt them touch something deep inside me, something that was not language, but longing. After prayer, we were given a cup of warm milk and a crust of bread. Then lessons began. We learned Turkish first, its curves and vowels, the way it rolled like the sea rather than striking like our rough village speech. Our teacher, a man with white hair and gentle eyes, would write words on a slate board and say them slowly, letting us taste each sound. Su, water. Ekmek, bread. Kalp, heart. He would tap his chest when saying that last word, and for a moment, we would all forget we were supposed to be soldiers. Then came Arabic, the language of the Quran. We practiced the letters on small tablets of clay, tracing each curve with a reed dipped in ink. The smell of the ink, sharp, earthy, filled the room. The letters looked like waves to me, and I imagined they could carry the prayers of all the mothers in the world if only they knew how to swim. When we failed, the teacher did not strike us. He only erased the words and told us to write them again, as if failure were not punishment, but patience in disguise. Between lessons, we tended the gardens, olive trees, fig trees, fountains shaped like lions or flowers. We swept the paths, fed the birds, carried water. Work was not shame here. It was a way of learning to be precise, to move with care, to leave beauty behind wherever your hands touched. In the afternoons, we studied history, stories of prophets, of kings, of empires that rose and fell like tides. The master told us, "The world is a book, and you are the ink. Wherever you go, you will write its next line." I wrote that in my mind, and never forgot it. After sunset, the air grew cool and the smell of oil lamps filled the halls. That was when we trained our bodies, sword, bow, spear, but also balance, silence, and breath. The sword master was called Hussein Aga. He moved like water over stone, without effort, without hurry. His beard was white, but his eyes were bright as new steel. He told us, "The sword is not for anger. It is for clarity. When you draw it, your heart must be empty, so that only justice can live there." He made us hold wooden swords for hours, arms extended, muscles shaking, until we learned that strength was not in the arm, but in endurance. When the real blades came, they were cold, and I remember the moment I first saw the light run along the edge. It was beautiful, frighteningly so. The steel hummed faintly when I moved it, as if remembering the hands of all who had wielded it before. We learned footwork in silence, only the sound of our sandals brushing the floor, the breath of 50 boys moving as one. When one stumbled, the others slowed to match his pace. We were no longer many. We were a single body with many names. Sometimes, Hussein would stop beside me, adjust my wrist, tilt my chin, say nothing. And in that silence, I learned more than words could teach. He once told me quietly after training, "Your body will forget your village before your heart does." That is not weakness. It is the mercy of time. That night I cried silently for the first time in months. We lived in small rooms, 4 boys to a chamber, each with a mat, a chest, and a small lamp. The air always smelled faintly of wax and soap. We shared everything, bread, laughter, even silence. There was Yusuf, once Petar, whose jokes had begun to fade but whose smile remained when the moonlight hit it. There was Nicola, who still carried his wooden saint, now hidden under his pillow. And there was Ahmed, a boy from the mountains of Anatolia, who sang when he thought we were asleep, low, haunting songs about rivers and birds that never returned. Sometimes, after lights were out, we whispered about home. Our voices trembled not from sadness, but from the strangeness of remembering. Each memory felt like touching a wound you no longer wanted to heal. One night, Yusuf said, "Do you think we'll ever go back?" I said, "Maybe. But if we do, they won't know us." He looked at me and smiled sadly. "Then we'll tell them new names." We laughed quietly, not because it was funny, but because laughter is the only way to keep from breaking. Seasons passed. The olive trees in the courtyard grew silver again with spring. Our hands grew steady, our hearts less wild. When I looked at the new boys arriving, I saw in them the fear I had once worn, and it softened me. The masters began to teach us poetry, calligraphy, music. We learned that the empire valued not only warriors, but men who could write, speak, and think with grace. Each night I copied verses from Persian poets, Rumi, Saadi, Hafez. Their words about love and faith and longing filled my mind like light through a stained glass window. I began to understand that even beauty could be a weapon, one that conquers without blood. Sometimes, when the call to prayer echoed through the palace, I felt my old self rise like a ghost behind me, the barefoot boy from the village, the son of a woman with rough hands and gentle eyes. He would whisper, "Don't forget." And I would answer, "I remember." But I must also learn, the teachers told us, to serve is not to lose yourself. It is to become larger than yourself. I wanted to believe them. And some days, I did. Years passed like pages turned in silence. I was taller now, stronger. My Turkish flowed easily. I prayed without hesitation. But the bead from my mother never left my chest. I wore it hidden under my uniform, a secret sun that no one could see but me. Then came the day of testing, when boys became men and men became Janissaries. The courtyard was filled with light. Drums sounded slowly, like the heartbeat of the empire itself. We stood in rows, our swords laid before us, gleaming like silver rivers. The Sultan's seal hung above the gate, and the wind carried the scent of incense and iron. An imam recited the oath. We repeated the words, each syllable carving its way into us. I will be loyal to my Sultan, faithful to my brothers, steadfast in the service of God. When I spoke them, my voice did not tremble, but inside another voice, small, old, familiar, whispered my first name once more, and I carried both voices together, like two wings of the same bird. After the ceremony, Hussein Aga approached me. He placed his hand on my shoulder and said, "Now you are not a boy, nor a slave, nor a captive. You are the bridge between two worlds. Walk it with care." His words have lived in me ever since. That night, under the quiet sky of Istanbul, I dreamed not of war, but of peace, the kind that lives between breath and prayer, between what is lost and what is found. Years had passed, though in the palace we did not measure time as others did. The seasons came softly, not through snow or harvest, but through the color of the courtyard's light. Golden in spring, silver in autumn, quiet and eternal in winter. By then, I had become one of the Ajami Olanlar, the inner circle of boys chosen for the Janissary Corps. Our heads were shaved smooth, our steps synchronized, our hearts trained to move with the rhythm of the drum and the breath of prayer. Yet when I looked at my brothers, I saw not soldiers, but 100 stories learning to live under the same name. We were the brothers in silence, not because we had nothing to say, but because our words had become too sacred to spend carelessly. Our barracks faced the sea. At dawn, the sky would pour its pale light through the lattice windows, and the air smelled of salt, stone, and the faint smoke of olive oil lamps. We woke to the soft strike of a gong, one note only, and rose as one body, each movement part of a ritual that belonged to no man but to all of us. We prayed together. We ate together. We trained until our hands were calloused and our lungs burned clean. And in the quiet that followed, after every clash of blades, after every command shouted and obeyed, there was a stillness that felt holy. There were no ranks between us yet, only closeness. We were brothers forged not by blood, but by loss. Each of us had been taken, remade, renamed, and that sameness became its own kind of comfort. Yusuf, once Petar, slept on the mat beside mine. He had grown taller, leaner, his laughter deeper. Sometimes he carved small figures out of olive wood, birds mostly, or tiny horses with proud necks. He said it helped his hands remember gentleness. Nicola had been given the name Ali. He had a scar across his left hand from a sword drill gone wrong. He liked to trace it with his thumb when he was thinking. He still kept the little wooden saint under his pillow, though now he called it an old friend. In the evenings, after training, we would sit in the courtyard. No words, just the sound of the fountain, the flutter of doves nesting in the eaves, the city beyond, a soft murmur of life we were not part of, yet somehow served. Sometimes one of us would hum a melody from nowhere, a tune without words, woven from memory and yearning. Others would join in, and the sound would rise between the stone walls, not loud, not mournful, just human. We were taught that silence was discipline, that emotion was weakness, that loyalty must live where desire dies. But in that silence, I discovered something else, the echo of souls refusing to vanish. Our training grew harder as the years deepened. The sword was now a part of us, an extension of our thought, an answer to questions too ancient for speech. We practiced until twilight, until our shadows became long versions of ourselves that still moved even when we wanted to stop. Sometimes the master would walk among us with the calm of a priest, correcting a stance here, adjusting a wrist there. He once said, "You must not love the sword, but you must listen to it. It speaks only when your mind is quiet." I learned to listen, to the breath between movements, to the air trembling against steel, to the way my heartbeat aligned with the sound of 50 others. That rhythm became a kind of prayer. When we fought in pairs, Yusuf was always my partner. He moved with grace, never wasting energy, his eyes calm even in the heat of practice. Once, after a long sparring session, our blades met so precisely that they locked, and neither of us could move. We stood there, breathing each other's breath, until the master clapped his hands and said, "Good. You are now one that night," Yusuf whispered. "Do you think brothers like us ever fight for real?" I said, "Only when the world forgets what made them brothers." He smiled faintly. "Then may the world never forget." Not all our days were made of steel. There were lessons in music, geometry, philosophy. We learned the stars, how to read their paths, how to find direction when all maps fail. The stars became our secret friends, their light soft and patient above the domes of Istanbul. In the music room, We were given small instruments, ney, oud, quanun. Their sounds were strange at first, but when played together, they blended like memories in a dream. The teacher, a blind man who smelled of sandalwood, told us, "Music is what the sword cannot say." Sometimes, during prayer, I would close my eyes and hear both, the faint hum of steel in my bones and the low song of the ney rising like incense toward heaven. Both belonged to me. Both somehow were the same language. We were also taught calligraphy. I loved it, the quiet precision, the way the brush moved like a breath held too long, the way one letter could carry the weight of eternity. My hand, once used only to grip a sword, learned to trace beauty instead of death. One spring morning, word spread that the Sultan himself would visit the barracks. The air changed. Even the birds seemed to know something grand was coming. We cleaned our weapons until they shone like liquid light. Our uniforms were pressed, our sandals scrubbed, our hearts rehearsed into stillness. When he arrived, the courtyard fell silent. He was not as old as I imagined, his beard black, his eyes bright and deep. He walked slowly among us, his robe trailing over the white stones like mist. When he stopped before me, I lowered my gaze. He studied my face, then took my sword, examined it, and said softly, "A clean blade reflects the heart." He returned it and moved on. That night, Yusuf said, "He looked at you like he knew you." I smiled. Perhaps he saw what all rulers see. Children turned into silence. As the years passed, I began to dream again of my village. The small house, the smell of bread, the sound of my mother calling the goats. I would wake with tears that never fell. One evening, I took parchment and ink and began to write her a letter. Not to send, for there was nowhere to send it, but to remember how to speak her name. I wrote, "Mother, the city is too large for dreams, but I keep one small enough to fit in my hand, the bead you gave me. I have learned their prayers, their swords, their words. Yet when the wind blows from the west, it smells like home, and I know you are still there, breathing the same air that once shaped me." I folded the letter and placed it beneath my mat. Every few months, I would rewrite it, each time with steadier hands. Writing became my rebellion, a quiet act of remembering. One winter, they took us outside the city walls for the first time, to train on open ground. The snow came down like feathers, soft, endless, cleansing. We built fires at night, the smoke curling into a sky so clear it looked carved. That was when I saw my first battle, not of swords, but of eyes. A group of villagers came to deliver food and supplies. Among them was a woman, perhaps 30, maybe younger, with eyes like my mother's. She looked at me for a long time, and in her gaze I saw recognition, not of who I was, but of what I had once been. She did not speak. She did not need to. The silence between us said everything. When she left, I pressed my hand to my chest, where the bead lay, and whispered, "Still here." Years folded into years. Some of us rose in rank. Some fell in battle. Some disappeared into the machinery of empire, names replaced by titles. But those of us who remained carried one another like anchors. Yusuf, Nicola, Ahmed, each a thread in the tapestry of my soul. We had been made to forget our homes, yet in each other we found fragments of them. We shared bread, we shared silence, we shared the knowledge that our lives belonged to something vast and unknowable. And though the empire called us Janissaries, in our hearts, we were still just boys who had once been loved by mothers, still keeping that love hidden like a secret flame that no wind could extinguish. I had grown into my uniform. The linen no longer hung loose on my shoulders. My hands, once small enough to clutch a mother's shawl, now held the weight of steel without trembling. I had become what they had promised, a soldier of the Sultan, a guardian of the empire, a man shaped by silence. But sometimes, when I stood in the courtyard at dawn, watching the sun spill across the Bosphorus like molten gold, I would remember the boy who once walked barefoot on stones slick with river water, and wonder whether he still existed inside me, or if he had already turned to dust in the name of duty. The day of our final initiation came when the air was heavy with summer. The palace shimmered beneath the light, its domes radiant as if they were made of glass and breath. We gathered in the great courtyard, hundreds of us, our white robes blinding in the sun. The drums beat deep, slow, a rhythm that seemed to rise from the very heart of the earth. An imam stood before us, his voice carrying through the heat. He spoke of loyalty, of sacrifice, of the eternal bond between soldier and sultan. We knelt, our swords before us, their blades reflecting the light like small, controlled suns. The words of the oath came again, ancient, familiar, and yet they felt heavier now, as if each syllable carried the weight of every boy ever taken, ever trained, ever silenced. I swear to serve my sultan in life and in death. I will stand firm in battle, silent in pain, faithful in every breath. As I repeated those words, I felt something tighten inside me. Not fear, not sorrow, but a kind of transformation. I was both the child and the soldier, the wound and the weapon. When we rose, the master came to each of us, touched our foreheads with his hand, and whispered blessings in Arabic. When he came to me, he paused longer than usual. "You have a quiet heart," he said softly. "Do not let the noise of the world drown it." That night, as the city celebrated with torches and music, I sat alone in the barracks. The bead lay in my palm, warm from my skin. I whispered the oath again, but in the space between the words, I heard my mother's voice, and it filled the silence like rain on dry ground. Our first campaign began in the early spring. The empire was restless. The Sultan sought to expand its borders once more. Rumors came from the west, of rebellion, of foreign kings testing their strength, of lands rich in stone and sorrow. We were ordered to march. The morning we left Istanbul, the air was thick with mist. The domes of Hagia Sophia floated like islands in a sea of cloud. We walked in formation, rows upon rows of white, the sound of our boots a single heartbeat echoing down the ancient streets. Women threw petals from balconies. Children watched with wide eyes, as if we were not men but spirits of war passing through their city. The road stretched endlessly, lined with olive trees that swayed like prayers in the wind. We carried no fear, only purpose, drilled into us until it became second nature. We spoke little, our silence more powerful than any battle cry. At night, we camped beneath stars that shimmered like coins scattered by a careless god. We shared bread, recited verses, and sharpened our swords by the firelight. The steel caught the glow of the flames, and for a moment, each blade looked alive. A thin, burning soul. Yusuf sat beside me, his eyes reflecting the fire. "Do you ever wonder," he said quietly, "if the men we fight also pray for victory?" I looked at him, then at the dark horizon where the mountains waited. "Perhaps," I said. But God must love the ones who pray for peace more. He nodded, and neither of us spoke again. The first time I saw death, it was not as terrible as I had imagined. It was quick, a shadow crossing the light. One moment a man was standing, the next he was a memory. The field smelled of iron and smoke, of trampled grass and burning wood. Our drums beat like thunder, our banners snapped in the wind. Arrows hissed through the air like whispers. The clash of swords was a music of its own, discordant, endless, terrifyingly human. I moved through it as I had been taught. Steady breath, eyes clear, each strike an answer, not a question. The noise fell away. The world became the rhythm of my own heart. And yet, amid the chaos, I saw a boy, no older than I had once been, his face smeared with dirt and fear. He held his weapon clumsily, his eyes full of a desperate, pleading confusion. I hesitated. In that instant, he could have killed me. But he didn't. He lowered his sword. We looked at each other, two sons of mothers who would never meet. Then another soldier passed between us, and when I looked again, the boy was gone. After the battle, I walked among the fallen. The sky was pink with sunset, and the wind carried the smell of smoke and blood and wildflowers. I found the boy's body near the river, his eyes still open, as if searching for something he'd lost on the way here. I took a small coin from my pouch and placed it over his chest. It was all I could give him, a gesture for the dead and for the boy I had once been. When we returned to Istanbul, the city greeted us like a mother greeting her sons. The streets were lined with banners, the air thick with perfume and cheers. Drummers played, and the people showered us with rose petals and blessings. We were heroes now, the protectors of the empire, the sultan's chosen. But the cheering sounded hollow in my ears. For every victory, there was a silence that followed. The silence of those who would never return. At the barracks, I sat by the fountain and watched the water fall. It was the same fountain from my first night here, and yet it felt different now. The marble seemed older, the water slower. Yusuf came to sit beside me. He handed me a piece of bread. We ate without speaking. After a while, he said, "Do you ever think about home?" "Every night," I said. "But home has become a place that exists only when I close my eyes." He smiled. "Then keep it there. Some things are meant to live in dreams." Months later, the Sultan summoned me to the palace. The corridors shimmered with gold mosaics and the scent of incense. Guards lined the hall like statues. When I entered the chamber, he was seated by a window overlooking the sea, the sunlight painting his robe with fire. "You have served well," he said. "Discipline is the greatest virtue of a man. You have learned it. Now teach it to others." And so I became a leader of the younger recruits, the frightened boys who arrived from villages as I once had. I saw myself in their eyes, the same confusion, the same quiet grief. I taught them not just how to fight, but how to breathe, how to move like water, how to live without hatred. "Remember," I told them, "a sword that kills without understanding kills its master too." They listened. Some smiled. Some cried when they thought I wasn't looking. And I understood that even in a place built for obedience, the heart finds its own small rebellions. Years passed. The empire grew wider, but within me, a question began to grow like a shadow under sunlight. We had become more than soldiers. We were power itself, untouchable, disciplined, feared. But power is a slow poison. It seeps into the soul until loyalty turns to pride and pride turns to blindness. I saw it in the eyes of my brothers, the hunger for more, the arrogance that whispered, "We are the empire, not its servants." Yusuf felt it too. One evening he said, "We have become what we once pitied, men without homes, worshipping the walls that hold them." His words struck deep. For the first time, I wondered if obedience could also be a form of captivity. I walked through the courtyard that night, the fountain murmuring beside me, the air heavy with jasmine and memory. I touched the bead at my chest. It was warm, as it always was, as if reminding me that mercy, too, is a kind of strength. In the end, it was not the enemy that unmade us. It was a whisper inside our own house, a slow fire fed by pride. I have learned that empires do not break like glass. They loosen, thread by thread, until the tapestry sighs and falls by itself. It began, as endings often do, with a murmur. New orders, new drills, new ways. The city felt different, as if someone had turned the Bosphorus a degree colder, as if the gulls had been asked to cry more softly. A decree was read in the courtyard, a parchment unrolled like a serpent in sunlight. We were to be reformed. New uniforms, new discipline, new obedience to a future only a few could see. Some of the younger men nodded. Change was a door they were eager to open. But among the older ranks, the air grew bristled and hot. We had been the spine of the empire. Who would dare tell the spine to bend? At night, the barracks filled with low voices, not the fraternal hum of boys sharing bread, but the throb of grievance. Old wars retold, old glories polished, old wounds warmed like coals for winter use. Yusuf sat beside me on the steps, his hands quiet in his lap. "They are sharpening anger," he said. "Anger is a bad blade," I answered. "It cuts the hand that loves it." We did not shout. We did not argue. We walked the length of the courtyard like men counting the breaths of a dying friend. The first spark was small, an insult, a refusal to drill in the new formation. A handful of men turning their backs when the captain spoke. But sparks do not care for scale. They only love dry wood. There were gatherings in tea houses, cups clinking like impatient coins, words swelling like bruises. A captain's tent was overturned outside the city walls. A drum was struck out of rhythm, deliberately, defiantly. The city listened. The city remembered. The city waited. I stood before my own company, the boys I had taught to breathe like water, and saw in them a fever that neither prayer nor reason dulled. "Brothers," I said, "we were built to stand between the Sultan and the storm, not to become the storm." Some lowered their eyes. Others looked through me as if I were already a ghost. On the morning the world changed, the sky wore no omen, only an ordinary blue, rinsed and indifferent. A wind sprang up from the strait, carrying the smell of tallow, iron, and the first figs. We formed at dawn, waiting for orders that did not come. From the palace quarter, a column of smoke began to rise, thin at first, then thick, black silk unspooling from an invisible loom. The city hushed. Even the coppersmith's hammers paused mid-air. Then the drum, not ours, not the steady heart we knew, but a new thunder, closer to the palace, answered by the snap of commands we had never learned. Gates closed. Streets narrowed. The city rearranged itself like a chessboard a clever child had studied too long. We were no longer soldiers in our home. We were men inside a tightening fist. My company looked to me. "Do we march?" someone asked. "We hold," I said. "We hold until the anger subsides." but anger, once called, does not love to leave unfed. They came at noon, when shadows are short and forgiveness is shorter. Lines of men in the new order, their coats darker, their eyes steady as ledger lines. Behind them, guns, the heavy mouths of the age that had learned to speak louder than any prayer. A voice rose from our barracks, not mine, not Yusuf's, a voice sharpened by heat and fear. "Brothers, to arms!" Doorways belched men, white caps bright as doves startled into a storm. Steel flashed, a banner unfurled, the old emblem catching a wind that no longer belonged to us. I did not lift my sword. I lifted my hand. "Stand down," I called, but my voice fell like a leaf in a river already in flood. The first volley cracked the noon open. Smoke rolled across the square, warm and sweet with the smell of powder. Men staggered as if bumped by invisible shoulders. Others folded as gently as if kneeling to tie a sandal. We answered, because that is what bodies do when drilled to memory. Steel met smoke. Courage met mathematics. What we had mastered could not speak as far as what they had learned. Beside me, a boy I had taught last spring made the sign of a prayer on his chest and smiled. Not with joy, but with the clean relief of certainty. He fell with the smile still lit, a lamp set down carefully by a tired hand. The city, which had once cheered our victories with rose petals, watched through shutters narrowed to eyelashes. Mothers pressed their palms to doors. Children were gathered like herbs from a sudden rain. No one wanted to claim us now. Not because they hated us, because they had learned, as all cities must, to love whoever survives. We fell back through corridors we had polished, past fountains that had cooled our youth, under eaves where swallows nested year after year without learning fear. In the armory, Yusuf grasped my wrist. "Listen," he said. Between the gunfire and the shouting, I heard it. A sound like a long-held breath finally exhaled. Not victory, not mourning, history changing its gait. "I'm not afraid," he said. "I am," I answered, and we both smiled, because fear, shared, is softer than pride. The door blew inward, light, smoke, shouting. A man in the new coat stepped through, his weapon steady as a thought. He looked at us, the two of us, bareheaded, unraised, and hesitated long enough for mercy to be born. "Go," he said softly in a Turkish that remembered villages. "Go before the fire forgets it once warmed men." We went, because obedience to mercy is the last good lesson. The barracks burned at dusk, and with them our careful years. The wax-stained floors, the chalk lines where boys had stood straighter than they felt, the wall where I had traced letters in the air for hands that could not yet read. Flames lifted from the roofs, like bright birds seeking a kinder sky. Tiles cracked with small, brave sounds. The fountain steamed, its silver voice turning to ghost breath. I stood in an alley where the smoke curled like old silk and watched. My knees wanted to remember praying. My hands closed around the bead at my chest until its roundness hurt. Inside the roar, I heard boyhood. 100 sparrows, the slap of sandals. Hussein Aga's calm correction. The night Yusuf whispered that the world must not forget what makes brothers. A roof gave way with a sigh that sounded like yes. After the fire, the city yawned and stretched itself into a new morning. Edicts were posted where bread is sold. Men who had worn our uniform learned to wear another or to love quiet work. Some vanished into villages like stones returning to rivers. Some bent their backs to docks and called it peace. Names that had once opened doors learned to open crates and smile. I rented a room near the water in a quarter that smelled of salt and cumin. I mended nets for men who spoke in proverbs and paid in coins warmed by their palms. At dawn, I poured water over the doorstep for luck. At night, I listened to boats rub their ropes against wood, a soothing, patient sound, the sound the heart makes when it has forgiven itself for surviving. Sometimes a boy would bring me a broken oar or a cracked flute. I fixed both with the same care. Wood, like men, answers better to gentleness than to force. Years loosened their belts. The city taught me how to live small without becoming less. I learned the names of the gulls by the way they turned in wind. I learned the old Greek of a fishmonger who swore only by saints that smell of garlic. I learned that tea tastes sweeter if you pour it for someone else first. On Fridays, I visited a small graveyard where the cypresses stand like ink strokes against the sky. There, a stone with no name received my silence. Sometimes I placed a fig on it, sometimes a flake of bread, sometimes only my hand, flat and warm. Brother, I would say, not knowing which brother. The wind always answered, and that was enough. One winter evening, a young soldier in the new coat stood in my doorway. His cap was damp from snow. His eyes were careful. Are you? He searched for the right word, polite as a guest. Old? I helped him. Yes, he smiled. My father said the best knots in the city are tied on this street. I tied his rope, mended his torn sleeve, poured him tea. He did not ask me questions, and I did not burden him with answers. When he left, he bowed, not to the uniform I no longer wore, but to the man I had become outside of it. Sometimes, in sleep, the barracks rise whole again, white caps in rows, the clean strike of sandals, the fountain clearing its throat at dawn. I walk among the boys, and none of them see me. I put my hand on each shoulder and say the same thing: be kind. Not because kindness wins, because it makes loss bearable. When I wake, the room is quiet except for the sea brushing the key like a mother smoothing a child's hair. I light a lamp. I take out the bead. It has grown warm from years of being the sun of a small universe. Mother, I say to the darkness that has carried her across so many nights, I did not return tall to your door, but I learned to carry your door in my chest. The olive tree inside me shakes its silver leaves. Somewhere far inland, a shawl is lifted from a chair and placed on shoulders that still know my name. If you ask me what the fall was, I will not tell you dates. I will tell you this: a corps is not a building, not a banner, not a drum. It is the sum of boys taught to breathe together. It falls when they forget that breath is a gift, not a right. Power is not a lamp you hold against the dark. It is the oil you owe to those who come after. We emptied the lamp to admire its shine. The night forgave us only by forgetting us. And yet, the river keeps its promise to the sea. The sea keeps its promise to the moon. I keep my promise to a woman in a small house beneath a slow, kind sky. To live gently, to return in the only ways left. In the bread I share, in the swords I do not raise, in the boys I teach to tie the world together with good knots. When the wind moves through cypress trees, I hear the old drum, steady and patient. I do not march. I count my breath and let the sound be a blessing on the city that taught me how to be both taken and given back. I live now beside the water. a narrow room of stone and light, its walls the color of sand after rain. Outside my window, the Bosphorus hums like a memory that refuses to end. Ships come and go, small shadows against the morning, each carrying voices I will never learn, each leaving a wake that fades quickly but never completely. The neighbors call me Usta, the old craftsman. They bring me nets to mend, ropes to untangle, sometimes a kettle that leaks from the seam. I fix everything slowly. Age has made me careful. Every knot I tie is a prayer. When my hands tremble, I tell the children it's the sea inside me still moving. The mornings are pale and kind. The gulls arrive before the fishermen. They hover in the dawn like torn pages waiting to be written upon. I pour tea in a small cup, the glass thin enough to show the color of the sky through it. Steam curls upward, and for a moment I see her face there. My mother, her eyes bright as candlelight in the wind. I whisper, "I am tall now, as you wished," though the only witness is the sea itself. There is a rhythm to old age. It moves slower, like the tide that creeps instead of crashes. Each day is a repetition of gestures, lighting the lamp, folding the blanket, sweeping sand from the doorstep, listening to the market's hum rise and fall like distant drums. Sometimes I walk to the hill above the harbor, where cypress trees mark the edge between land and forever. From there, the city looks like a bowl of gold dust, its domes gleaming in the late light, its call to prayer floating across the water, like a soft command to breathe. I sit beneath the trees and close my eyes, and in the wind that moves through their branches, I hear the sound of sandals on marble, the strike of wooden swords, the echo of boys repeating lessons long forgotten. They are all here, my brothers, Yusuf with his half-smile, Nicola tracing the scar on his hand, Ahmed humming a song that no language owns. They pass by me like shadows that know my name, but do not stop. Each one younger than the last, each one walking toward a light that never blinds. When I open my eyes, the hill is empty again, but the air is still warm, as if they had only just gone. On the table near my bed lies a stack of paper, letters written but never sent. They are all to the same woman. I still call her mother, though the word feels too small now. The empire has grown, and so have I once wrote. I have seen mountains, deserts, and seas. I have held a sword, and I have laid it down. I have worn uniforms and walked barefoot through snow, and through it all, I carried your bead. It is smooth now, all its edges worn away, like the hard parts of me. Sometimes, when the lamp burns low, I take one of those letters and read it aloud to the darkness. It does not answer, but I feel it listening. Last spring, after many years, I went inland again. My body protested, but my heart insisted. The road wound between olive groves and small villages that smelled of bread and dust. Children waved. A shepherd nodded, as if recognizing something familiar in my step. By evening I reached the place where the mountains begin to hold hands with the sky. I found no village there, only stones, wild grass, and a fig tree standing where my mother's house once was. Its branches were silver in the fading light, its leaves whispering softly to no one. I sat beneath it, placed the bead at its roots, and said, "I have come home." The wind answered first, then a bird, one of those that never stay long, and in that moment, I knew the truth. Home is not a place that waits. It is the quiet that follows when forgiveness finally sits down beside you. Now the nights are long, but not lonely. The sea keeps me company, singing its endless song, a lullaby older than all empires. Sometimes the waves sound like marching, sometimes like prayer, sometimes like the whisper of my mother's shawl when she turned toward the door. When I dream, the city glows again. The barracks are whole, the fountain runs clear. The young boys laugh as if time had never learned their names. I walk among them unseen, touching each shoulder lightly, leaving a blessing that smells of jasmine and salt. In the dream, I am neither soldier nor slave, neither child nor elder, only breath and memory, woven into the same endless fabric as the sea and the stars. If you are still awake, if this voice has drifted into your room from far away, know that the world has more mercy than history admits, that even the taken can give, and even the lost can guide. When sleep comes for you, let it come like the tide, slowly, kindly, without command. If you hear the rustle of trees, it is the olive branches waving you home. If you hear the low hum of the wind, it is my brothers still marching toward dawn, their steps softer than sand. And if you feel warmth in your palm, perhaps it is a bead, small, smooth, glowing faintly, carrying all the love that was never lost, only waiting to be found again. At the edge of the morning, I rise once more and stand by the sea. The first call to prayer rises, folding into the cries of gulls and the whisper of waves. The sun touches the water, and for an instant, everything, the city, the empire, the world, is made of gold. I close my eyes, and the sound I hear is not a drum, but a heartbeat. Steady, human, forgiving. And as light fills the sky, I whisper to the wind, walk like the son of a king, and remember when you were the son of no one but love. And so the years turned, and the empire folded itself back into silence. The boy who was taken became a man who learned mercy. The soldier who once marched learned to listen, and the mother who waited learned that love travels farther than any road. If this story has kept you company tonight, let it rest now in your thoughts like a soft bead in your hand, a reminder that even loss can glow with kindness. Tell me in the comments, where are you listening from, and what time is it in your world right now? Until our next story, may peace find you gently, and may your dreams be kind. Good night, travelers, and thank you for dreaming with me.